to Rising Up for Justice, a special weekly series presented by Rising Up with Sonali, an independently produced, subscriber-supported program syndicated to radio stations, free speech TV, and podcast platforms. I'm Sonali Kolhatkar, host and executive producer. Our nation and our world is overrun by billionaires and bigots, but they are few and we are many. On this series, exclusive to subscribers of Rising Up with Sonali and viewers of Free Speech TV, we'll hear from organizers in the movements for social justice and dig into the nuts and bolts of values, strategies, tactics, narratives, and building power. This week, my guest is Ahmad Abuznaid, the executive director of the U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights and USCPR Action. Prior to joining USCPR, Ahmad co-founded the Florida-based Dream Defenders and went on to lead the National Network for Arab American Communities as its executive director from 2017 to 2019. I'm so pleased to welcome Ahmad Abuznaid to the program. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Sonali. It's always a pleasure.
How do you summarize the work that USCPR does, including the main issue you work on, which of course is Palestine? But how do you summarize the entirety, if you will, of this issue and what you see as your organizational goals?
Yeah, that's a great question. We are the U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights, and so the title gives you a bit of a sense of what we're about. But in reality, it's deeper than that because since we are in the middle of the United States of America, the biggest backer, the biggest arms provider, and the biggest diplomatic defender of the state of Israel, we actually, as tax-paying citizens here, have a burden. We have a duty, we have a responsibility, and we should be ending all military aid to the state of Israel. That is our stated mission, that is our stated goal. And we believe that that accomplishes two things. That ending of military support to the state of Israel would empower the Palestinian people to be in a greater position to determine our self-determination, our liberation, without, of course, the United States of America supporting and supplementing and financing Israel's occupation. But on the other hand, that also would put U.S. taxpayers in a greater position to demand where we would like our taxpayer dollars going towards. I think we often hear time and time again how Social Security benefits need to be cut because they're too expensive. Healthcare costs cannot be supplemented by the government because it's too expensive. We have infrastructure falling apart in this country. We have teacher salaries that we can't afford and schools that are closing down. And so there's so many issues that we actually need investment in here domestically. And the U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights is a part of a greater movement, both demanding a divestment from war and genocide and apartheid, but also investment in our communities here.
And so we are, of course, in the midst of this horrific genocide in Gaza in particular, and there are organizations that are calling simply either for a ceasefire or to end the genocide. And it seems as though the USCPR's goal is a lot broader than that, both linking Palestinian liberation with the liberation of U.S. Residents as well. So it's a big thing that you're working towards.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, the reality is the circumstances and the environment that we're in right now could not be more challenging. It was already a daunting task to eliminate U.S. military aid to the state of Israel prior to the beginning of the genocide. Only when it was ethnic cleansing and apartheid and occupation, it was really deeply challenging for our movement. And so we are doing our best now to continue to stay clear-eyed and focused on our goal ahead, but at the same time, being realistic that we are in the midst of a genocide. And this is a deeply traumatic, deeply challenging time for us as Palestinians here in the West, here in the belly of the beast, as our taxpayer dollars, as our elected officials continue to support the genocide at every turn. But it's incumbent upon us to hold both of those truths. The fact that this is an incredibly challenging and difficult time on us because it's genocide, and more people every day are actually coming to the point of awareness that we're seeking to get them towards. That the US should not be supporting and arming Israel. We should not be supporting and defending this genocide. And we actually have critical needs here domestically in our communities that our government should actually be focused on.
How is USCPR engaging? What are the strategies you're engaging into achieving these goals? I know that a number of kits and tools on your website. People can look up how their tax dollars are funding Israel. There's this downloadable graphics that you can change to change narrative. So lay out for me the ways in which you're trying to achieve these goals.
Yeah, I mean, I'll cite a few things that we have on our plate here at U.S. Campaign. I mean, I think the U.S. taxpayer, the progressive, the centrist, the average taxpayer here in the U.S. Could be educated better around Palestine, around the realities on the ground, either in Gaza or in the West Bank. And so a big portion of what we do is educate. That's where a lot of the graphics that we create, that's where our military funding map come in handy, right? When the average taxpayer in Oklahoma wants to understand how many of their federal tax dollars are actually going to support Israel as opposed to supporting their domestic community needs. These military funding maps and these graphics and these different toolkits can really help educate people. But we also need to go beyond education, and what we also seek to do is to have these toolkits and these bits of information drive people to action, and that could mean action in a number of ways. We have a protest page where we make sure to add onto the list any protests that are upcoming. So for the person that's looking to find out where the next upcoming protest is in New York City, we want to make sure we have that information accessible to them. But also beyond that, what are the ways that they can get involved? And so these toolkits that we have, are going to be able to provide you with the information around, are there corporate structures that we are pushing for accountability on? For instance, we have a Stop Chevron campaign right now, where folks are being drawn to the complicity of Chevron as a corporation in empowering Israel's genocide, apartheid, and ethnic cleansing campaign in Israel and the occupied territories. And so, we want to make sure people are driven to action against corporate actors that are complicit. But also, in addition to the reality of federal policy, right? We know that, military funding for the state of Israel is a byproduct of federal policy. So our Congress, we want to make sure people are able to lobby and advocate against those tax dollars going to members of Congress, to the state of Israel, I'm sorry, via the members of Congress that are bought off by AIPAC. But we also want to make sure people in their local communities have the tools to advocate for divestment on the city, the county, or the state level. For example, there may be police exchange programs where their local police are actively training with the Israeli Defense Forces, a military that is right now being basically noted to be complicit in genocide by the United Nations, by the ICC, and by the ICJ. We want to make sure that people know this information on the local level and they're able to activate around it. It does not make us safer at all as community members here to have our police forces that already have long-standing issues, racism, police brutality that we've known in the history of this country. It does not make any of us safer to know that they're actually also actively training with a military force that is conducting a genocide. And so we want to make sure that not only do taxpayers have the information critical to be educated on the subject matter, but then they could take action, whether it's on the local, the federal, or even on the corporate accountability level.
I want to pull up or lift up what you were answering in the first answering the first question around the goals, what you were describing basically sounds like an abolitionist framework, taking money out of those institutions that are destructive, death-making institutions, putting them into life-giving institutions such as Social Security, healthcare, etc. Does USCPR see itself as an abolitionist organization, if not explicitly, at least implicitly?
Yeah, I mean, I think implicitly, that makes a lot of sense, right? We want to abolish the military industrial complex, right? And part of the way we do that is by divesting from, the funding of occupation, apartheid, and genocide. And the reality is, as taxpayers, we've been bamboozled. As community members, we've been bamboozled. We've been told time and time again that we simply don't have the resources. We don't have the federal tax dollars. We don't have the capacity to solve for the issues at hand, when the reality is we just haven't invested in attempting to solve those, right? So when we walk around our communities and see that, the issue of houselessness or homelessness has never actually been intentionally solved. Well, it's because they don't dedicate the resources, the time, and the capacity to solve for that question. Same with healthcare, same with our education and schools. The reality is our federal government is too wound up in forever wars. They're too wound up in a increasing Pentagon budget, an increasing war budget that has no accountability mechanisms. And so the taxpayers being shortchanged. And of course, they're not doing this with our approval. The polls continue to show that the average taxpayer in this country is opposed to funding those items. But due to the way our political game is structured, the lobbyists and the politicians that are bought off by the APACs of the world continue to drive policy. And so we look forward to a future where we can actually determine where we want our tax dollars invested. And I guarantee you that the average taxpaying American does not want to see genocide, war, and occupation as the top priority for our federal government. They'd like to see healthcare, education, investment in our communities.
I imagine some of the biggest challenges that USCPR has faced historically has simply been around narratives with regard to Palestine. We've been seeing this battle play out, perhaps these days less so than normal because of the genocide being undeniable, but this battle playing out around anytime you lobby for or speak out about Palestinian rights, you're equated as being anti-Semitic. And I'm wondering if you can explore how your organization has navigated that. It's been a very challenging time because there are literally, there's sort of at the state level, local level, and even at the federal level, attempts to silence people simply for speaking out for Palestinian rights.
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, it is a distraction. It is meant to move us off of our target. It is attempting to move us away from the very real pictures and videos and statements and stories we're seeing come out of not only Gaza, but of the West Bank. We are seeing a genocide conducted by the state of Israel and an ethnic cleansing campaign conducted in the West Bank. And that should be the conversation, full stop. We saw, many nations seek to hold Russia accountable immediately for what they were doing in Ukraine, whereas Israel has gotten the free pass for decades. And so, of course, the first way that the occupation and its US-based entities and structures will attempt to dissuade you from focusing on that is by making the accusation that we are, in fact, anti-Semitic. It couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, we stand against anti-Semitism along with our Jewish counterparts. And that's part of what is also important to acknowledge in this moment is more and more Jewish Americans are rejecting that conversation. They're rejecting the notion that Palestinian rights has to come at the expense of the fight against anti-Semitism. Actually, we are locked in arms together. We see it as actually us having a common foe, a common enemy in white supremacy. If we think about the structures that are actively in support of the genocide. They are structures that are actually in active support of white supremacy and white nationalism in this country. So I think what we have to do is both, affirm who we are in our politics and our values and ethics as being an organization that is opposed to racism and discrimination in all of its forms, including anti-Semitism. And at the same time, to reject those accusations and say we are not going to be dissuaded, we are not going to be thrown off our mark. We're going to remain steel and clear-eyed on our objective. Ending all military aid to the state of Israel will not only support the Palestinian people and make a stand against Israeli human rights abuses and genocide and apartheid, and it's also saying that we as Americans deserve better. We deserve a government that wants to invest in our communities here and not just carry water for an apartheid genocidal regime.
I'm wondering if you can reflect on the fact that it has taken a genocide to get enough people to understand the humanity, to acknowledge the humanity of Palestinians, and it shouldn't have, right? And hindsight is always 2020. We see after the fact, after Holocausts are enacted, that, oh, we should have spoken up, never again. But that never again often doesn't happen because for some reason, the powers that be, etc., are very successful at erasing and people's humanity, at dehumanizing Palestinians. It shouldn't have taken a genocide for the Palestinian human rights to be just acknowledged. And I can imagine for folks like yourself who've been in this movement a long time, that's been really frustrating.
Absolutely. I mean, the fact of the matter is, my family, 99% of my family in the West Bank has never known a day of freedom. And they didn't choose to be occupied by Jewish people. They didn't choose for the state of Israel to be the occupier. This is the circumstance we've been dealt. And similarly, with regard to the narrative, the Zionist institutions and their propaganda have been working in collaboration and infiltrating institutions for decades here. And so we know that the dominant position has been one of intolerance to, and matter of fact, opposition to Palestinian liberation. And this is the circumstance we've been dealt. Now, I wish it was different. I wish it was easier for people to acknowledge the immense oppression, the immense difficulty to the position that Palestinians have been dealt. But you know what? We're working to change hearts and minds, and we're actually winning in a way in shifting that narrative that we haven't seen in prior history here in the United States. So it is a product of decades of work of people organizing since they came to this country. It is a product of work that non-Palestinians have been committed to, along with their Palestinian comrades here in the West. And we're going to need more people to continue to help us shift the narrative and to shift the conversation here in the United States. I will say it's cracking, right? We're seeing openings that we've never seen before. I wish it didn't have to take the genocide. I really wish that we were able to stop the genocide. It's deeply frustrating that we've seen so many people voice their opposition. We've seen poll after poll. We've seen protests in the hundreds of thousands. We've seen millions of calls and letters to Congress, and we've seen no movement. And that can be deeply frustrating. But at the same time, I continue to be reminded that people are with us, whether, we're talking about the people in the UK, whether we're talking about the people in the Arab countries or the people here in the United States of America. Their people are with us, but unfortunately, the governments, the institutions are far behind. And so we're going to keep pushing them until they're taking the right position.
Right. You mentioned the UK. Italy recently has just been quite remarkable to see national solidarity. What about also lobbying Congress? The purse strings are held by our lawmakers. And I know that you have a USCPR action component as well. And I'm wondering if that's something you can discuss.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, our USCPR action arm is where we do all of our federal lobbying and where we, have endorsed. We just chose as USCPR Action to endorse Mamdani for mayor. We're deeply excited about the potential for those sorts of elected officials that put the needs and wants of community members first and not the needs and wants of a foreign lobby. Part of what we're dealing with here is that these institutions, APAC and its many different arms, have been in operation for decades, sowing the seeds. And we have a Congress that for the last few decades has been bought not only by the APAC lobby, but the gun lobby, NRA, and big oil, big pharma. And so getting money out of politics is something that I think most Americans should be concerned with. But in the meantime, until we're able to actually enact that very fundamental change, which is necessary so that US taxpayers, US citizens, US voters can actually drive the policies that we have in mind. Until we get money out of politics, we're going to be focused on working with the members of Congress that we have to pass policies like the Block the Bombs Act. Now, maybe 2, 3, 4 years ago, it would have been unimaginable to see a piece of policy in Congress that actually seeks to end certain weapons going to the state of Israel. But we actually have that opportunity now. And just a few weeks ago, we only had, I believe if it was 6 to 8 weeks ago, we had around 20 signatories. And now we have over 55. And so I think there is, again, an opportunity for us to continue to push forward a message that says the US should no longer be complicit. The US should no longer arm. The US should no longer fund Israel's genocide against the Palestinian people. And after that comes accountability. So, we are hopeful that we'll continue to bring more elected officials signing on to sponsor, signing on to support the Block the Bombs Act. We'll continue with that work under USCPR Action. And we have many partners that are doing the same. So I think that while it can be frustrating to see that only 55 members have signed on to such a demand, the reality is even 55 was unimaginable just a couple years ago. So we'll continue to build upon the work that folks have done for decades, and we'll keep pushing until one day, and that day won't happen tomorrow, won't happen next year, but until one day we have the amount of votes necessary to say it's done, it's over with, no more.
What's the biggest challenge that you face? We talked about the criminalizing of speech and the silencing of speech, etc. But I'm also just wondering, we've seen people literally being threatened for deportation. Has USCPR been impacted by the current political climate in a way that you can talk about publicly and also call for support?
Yeah, I mean, we've faced lawsuits. We have dealt with those lawsuits, and so we're not actively right now in litigation or actively right now facing any lawsuits, but that takes time and attention. And of course, that is part of the goal of the opposition. They know that some of these lawsuits won't stick, won't stand. They know that some of these reports and allegations won't come to any sort of real impact. But there's secondary impacts, right? There's the fact that people have to take time to meet with lawyers. There's the time that you have to look over, what your C4 is doing versus your C3, what your C3 is doing. There is, a secondary impact on the staff, right? People go to work every day knowing and seeing all of the attacks that are happening on activists for speaking up for Palestine, and that has an impact. And we have to be honest and real with that. I think the challenge for us being in that position is saying, I know what I signed up for. And I know that the powers that be in the belly of the beast, in the heart of empire, the opposition being the greatest funded opposition that we can see, there are going to be attacks. And there are certain risks that we have to take in doing our work. And I think what we have to do is, to the best of our ability, compartmentalize, how we react to and respond to those different attacks and remain focused on what we need to remain focused on, which is our goal and our mission.
Give out a website for USCPR and also your social media handles.
Yeah, you can go to uscpr.org. And then on social media, you can go to at USCPR and at USCPR Action. I think via our website, uscpr.org, you can also access a link to go to USCPR Action's website so that you make sure you can, access all the resources we have on our C3N and also our C4N and make sure you can stay up to date with all that we have going on.
And is there a way for people to support your work at those websites? I imagine that, this sort of work takes a lot of resources and it's not always the easy thing for mainstream philanthropy to support, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, thankfully, we are the sort of organization and movement that has been supported by the average, day-to-day donor. We derive most of our donations and support from everyday people across this country that are bought into our mission, that see a future where the Palestinian people are free, and we're all in communities that we see invested in. And so you can make a donation, a tax-exempt donation to USCPR at uscpr.org. And of course, a 501c4 USCPR Action is not tax deductible, but that really is the fuel that powers our movement to, again, be able to lobby and do direct support of, lobbying and engagement on a federal level, but also when we want to endorse candidates like Zohran Mamdani, you can do that via contributions to USCPR Action.
Ahmad, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Sonali. Much appreciated. Keep doing what you're doing. And I think the reality is we need more of these spaces where we can communicate to people our vision and people can engage with it. So I appreciate what you do for our movements.
All right, thank you so much. Again, Ahmad Abuznaid is my guest. He's the executive director of the U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights and USCPR Action. This is Rising Up for Justice, and I'm Sonali Kolhatkar, host and executive producer of this new weekly half-hour series exclusive to viewers of Free Speech TV and subscribers of my long-standing show, Rising Up with Sonali. Find out more at risingupwithsonali.com.